There we go.
When one of us speaks, the camera will turn.
You gotta speak out loud.
There he is. I see him. I see him right there on the screen.
I want to get the owl's eyes off of me.
So cute, yeah.
Thanks for volunteering.
All right, so maybe we just ought to get things kicked off. So for starters, I want to thank all of you guys. A, for volunteering, B, for making the drive all the way over here. For some of you, it's probably a short ride and others probably a little bit longer. And for coming together basically on such short notice. It's great to see we've got representation from folks throughout the state, all of the regions represented by VSBA. And so really just a welcome and a thank you. Task force will be short-lived. We will be done with our work by the annual meeting in October. So 4 quick meetings, a lot of stuff to get through, some important stuff that we want to get to work on. But I just want to say thanks for doing this. We really appreciate it. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Secretary French to give us a little bit of an introduction, and I think it will help you all sort of solidify the reason of why you're here and why we pulled you all together.
Yeah, good evening. It's great to be with you. Appreciate having a few minutes to talk about, for me, what I think is some of the most critical work in front of us, assuming we're past COVID. And that has to do with what we're calling district quality standards. This is an outgrowth of the work around the pupil weighting study I'm sure you're all familiar with. And when the weighting study entered into the deliberations of the General Assembly, almost immediately, I can remember there was a conversation right at the beginning about, okay, so I think the legislature's, my editorial comment was sizing up what was in front of them from a political perspective and a technical perspective. They were asking questions like, well, if we do this, what guarantee will there be that, if we change the weights, it'll actually lead to improved outcomes in the system? And that led us to a conversation around quality standards and the idea of a quality assurance process in standards. And when I say the word standards, I mean regulation. So that ultimately what got enacted in law this past session was a direction to the Agency of Education to develop district quality standards. So the concept here is that I know a lot of you have lived through No Child Left Behind Act. When Sue was my school board chair, I had the the memory and the privilege of working with her, but also the memory of standing up and defending all my schools in 2014 as being failing schools under No Child Left Behind Act. So that memory is still very much fresh in my mind. But somewhere between the state level accountability standards that are now still required under ESSA and what goes on in the classroom, a lot happens in the educational system in terms of processes and so forth at the district level. So the idea, currently our education quality standards largely speak to outcomes for students, but we're interested in looking at the processes that happen in the middle between state level accountability in the classroom. And that leads us to the idea of district quality standards, in particular, looking at things like financial operations, business operations of school districts, facilities management. I know you're keenly interested in that as association, and the issues of school safety planning. But also in that topic, we envision the idea of governance standards. And I've seen in my career a variety of different governance approaches across the state. So it's not so much to say there's a particular right way to do things, but I think there are some transcendent principles we could agree on that are good governance regardless of what model you use. And that led me to a conversation to reach out to Sue and leadership of your association and Phil to have a conversation to see if VSBA would be interested in participating in this conversation of development of district quality standards and specifically governance quality standards, which ultimately would reside in our regulation for the first time in Vermont. That work has been charged to the Agency of Education. We've been given a very specific time frame to present draft rules on that, and that deadline is February of this coming year, February 2023. So what I did is I drafted a letter to your leadership of your association. Hopefully you've seen that sort of outlines the context for this work and solicits your interest in partnership and developing and drafting district quality standards as they pertain to governance operations of school districts. So that's sort of the context in a nutshell. I appreciate your interest in this topic, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Secretary French. In a moment, I am going to turn this meeting over to Mark. As you guys all saw, we just tapped him to sort of chair and run the meetings. But at the moment, any questions from any participants for Secretary French? Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
The statute also mentioned business and facilities management. Is that going to be a separate process, or is that the scope of this discussion?
Yeah, I think it's certainly we would welcome your association's participation in the other domains, if you will, of district quality standards. I'll call them buckets, I guess, rather than domains. We are still sort of scoping that out, but I think you referenced the statutory language. Yes, there's going to be some focused energy on the business and financial operations of school districts. Also facilities management, and I'll add school safety, facilities safety to that list. We'd welcome your association's participation in any of that work, but specifically reached out to your association on the issue of governance standards. So hoping that you would take a leadership role in advancing that particular work.
And Secretary French, maybe just to follow up on that, are there other organizations that are going to be leading the work in those other areas?
Not yet. We're still getting organized to do this work. Part of what we've been charged with, firstly, is that this is the first time the agency, not the state board, will be leading the development of regulation. So what we're also embarking on is a new process where the state board has a requirement to create an engagement plan for the agency. So what we hope to present at the state board's meeting in September is firstly a scope of what is this work? How do we envision what are the main domains or buckets of district quality standards, and how do we envision district quality standards interfacing with education quality standards that already exist, because the state board is leading a process around education quality standards revision as a result of the Act 1 ethnic studies group. So we want to see how these pieces come together. But I think, we'll have a better understanding of what the buckets are, the scope of the work as we come into that September meeting. And again, would welcome the participation of your association in the other domains, but I'm not reaching out necessarily to VASBO specifically on the business standards. I think we'll be looking for VASBO to participate in that as we would VSBA or VSA or VPA as we go through all those different aspects. But governance standards specifically, I'm looking for and asked if VSBA would take a leadership role in that.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for the Secretary? Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, could you explain or enlighten us? We're going to work very hard and come up with some dynamite standards that are going to serve this state and our district very, very well. What's the process once you get our recommendations? Who's going to be deciding? Is there a process for public participation and that sort of thing?
Yeah, great question. As I mentioned, this will be a sort of a test run for this idea of the state board charging the agency with a specific community engagement plan in the process of developing these rules. But ultimately, these will be rules or regulations of the agency. That by definition requires a public process. So your work product will be delivered to me and my team at the agency. We'll put that together along with the other work and ultimately present a complete draft of district quality rules, if you will, in the form of standards. But those will be presented through the normal rulemaking process, which itself requires community engagement and public interaction. The legislative committee on rules and so forth.
If I may.
You may. Mark, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, has a meta-analysis or literature review been done of any of the models or research done either across the United States or specifically out of Central Europe in the past 3 years?
On the topic of governance standards?
Yes.
We have not, and that's one of the reasons I was intrigued with having your association lead that work, and particularly with Mr. Gore's expertise. That's something we would seek to have you advance, and we certainly have the capacity to do that research. You might be aware Dr. Tammy Colby, who's on the state board, also has a research background in some of these areas. So we have that potential to bring more resources to bear. And it's something I do mention in my letter. I think with the compressed time frame and what we're seeking to accomplish, and what I probably characterize as the initial draft of these rules. When I say initial, meaning that 5 years from now we might wish to embellish them. But my thinking is that we're looking for some general themes and principles of what are good governance. It certainly would be useful to ground them in research or best practice that we see other places, but also really want to see them to be as responsive as possible to what Vermonters and Vermont school boards in particular consider to be best practice based on our considerable experience with local school board governance in the state.
Any other questions for the secretary?
Yeah, so
Yep.
there are some laws on the books. My understanding is that the school board is responsible for hiring every principal. If we deem that not to be good governance, is that no, but we could come into issues like that. What are your thoughts if that's?
Yeah, I think these are good questions. I think it's certainly, you want to be familiar with, what is the current statutory framework? And I would flag issues like that you might surface as things in the law that you would consider counterproductive to good governance practice is something we would flag for additional conversation with the legislature. But certainly the constraint you'd be working under right now is that any of the rules that we would put forward at the agency would have to conform to the current statutes that are on the books.
Great question. Anything else? I know the secretary is probably jealous of the pizza and salad that we have here.
I can smell it from here. I should mention another part of this. I'm still not practiced in introducing the concept. Again, I'm very, I think, excited about this opportunity, and it doesn't happen often when you get an opportunity to look at outside of a crisis. So you get to look at sort of the regulatory construct of our education system and really try to, from my perspective, shore up its foundation. There's really three elements at play here, and I'll just sort of highlight again. I didn't talk about the third one. I want to weave that into the conversation tonight. So we have this idea of the education quality standards. They're the current regulations that are on the books. The state board is going to be opening rulemaking on this, on that topic, largely because of the Act One Ethnic Studies Committee's recommendations, but that will open the whole body of education quality standards. It's not just on that one topic. So that will happen. We have this idea of district quality standards, which is a new concept, and one, as I sort of sketched out tonight, we'll be getting clearer on this, what we mean by the buckets of that in the larger project and how governance standards might fit into that. That will start to come together in the month of September. The third piece of this, which pulls the other two together, education quality standards and district quality standards, is the concept of quality assurance regulations, which is something also the legislature has charged us to work on. We currently do not have any quality assurance regulations. And in my career, I started 20 some odd years ago in Canaan, Vermont. I can remember walking into school and we had a certificate on the wall that said public school approval for the Canaan school. We've abandoned a lot of that when No Child Left Behind Act came along. So one of the things we want to think right out the gate as you're assuming you're interested in doing this work is thinking about what would the quality assurance process be for the state on issues of governance standards. So how would we know? Would it be that districts are engaging good governance practices? Would that be a attestation? Would it be a self-assessment? Would it be some sort of inspection every 3 years, looking at your minutes by the state or that kind of thing? So that's an open conversation. Not sure what that'll ultimately lead, but I think it's important right up front that we think about the quality assurance as we design the standards, because one of the things I've noticed over the years, sometimes we design processes without really thinking about how we'd actually implement them and how much capacity it would take to implement them. So it's important to me and my team that we think about quality assurance right up front from a capacity standpoint, that we think about how we'd hold ourselves accountable, but also in a doable manner that makes sense based on the scale of our state and our capacity.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions from task force members? I'm not seeing any at the moment. Thank you for the time tonight. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your leadership on this.
All right, you can go have your own slice of pizza now, I guess.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I think we're gonna move on then. We'll do a quick introduction and then I am gonna turn it over to Mark. And certainly with Bill's assistance as facilitator for the session this evening. And so as well too, but we'll just get working. For those of you who don't know, my name is Ian Waddell. I'm the president of the VSBA Board of Records. I'm a board member in Norwich, Vermont, and also serve on the Interstate School District, Dresden, with my colleagues from Hanover, New Hampshire. But we won't talk about them.
Sure, I'm Sue Sidlowski. I'm the executive director of the VSBA, and I am a former school board member. I served down in Bennington / Rutland County in the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union, and worked with Secretary French actually when he was the superintendent. Go ahead, Mark.
Mark Kaufman, from the Union School, Caledonia Central Supervisory Union, so that concept still kind of throws me. Old blind retired guy, former teacher, Marine officer, psychologist.
I'm Jackie Kelly. I'm coming from Bennington, south of where we were, way south. And presently I'm on two school boards. One is the Southwest Tech and the other one is Mount Anthony. And I used to be on the elementary board too, but got a little bit too much when we consolidated. So I'm looking forward to this meeting and sharing it with my colleagues.
I'm Alice Farrell. I'm on the Berry Unified Union School District and Central Vermont Career Center, the newly formed supervisory district for what was formerly known as just the Career Center in the back wing of Spalding High School. It now is its own district. I'm involved in education. I've been involved in education for almost 40 years and continue to do training for teachers and other interested people who want to know about special education.
Hi, I'm Dave School. I'm from Brattleboro, which is way down south. It's not in Massachusetts. It's in Vermont, Wyndham County. And I was on the Brattleboro Town School Board, the elementary board for many years. And then when we were consolidated, I was elected to the union board. We've got a district of Brattleboro, Putney, Guilford, and Dummerston, yeah, Campbell, which makes up 95% of our district, one district, and then we have another district in Vernon. They have high school choice, so they have 5% of our students, and those two make up our SU, and I'm on that board too. I was chair for the last couple of years, and now I'm vice chair. When we retired, we worked for a shipbuilder, history teacher, and looking into government standards. Hi, I'm Bill Edgerton from the White River Valley Supervisory Union, which is 11 communities bordering or close to the White River. And the Nubian school board I joined up last year after we fought to reestablish the unity between two of our communities that a late night opposition vote sought to separate us. My background's in public management in the city of Boston and in Wellesley and Concord, Massachusetts, and a variety of positions. My family, all of us have taught one time or another at various levels. And I happen to believe that there's something more sacred and important to be passionate about is public education and the welfare and the well-being of our children. And I'm personally very excited about the opportunity for us to look at and see how our various boards can be as effective as possible to carry out that sacred mission that we all have. Thank you.
Mark Koenig, I'm on the Addison Northwest School Board and also one of the lawyer commissioners for healthcare for education employees, which is how they rank this. promises to give back my grandmother. We can bring all of us in under budget under time. I am also a recovering attorney. I haven't practiced for a while, but I did do that for quite a while. I'm on the negotiation. I've been negotiating all of our stuff for a while, so. kind of Have those balls.
Get to wear nicer shirts now.
Yeah, I haven't had to wear a tie in so long.
Phil Gore, VSBA staff. I'm in my 6th month here. 20 years ago, I was a school board member and had to give up that seat when I accepted a position with the Washington School Boards Association as Director of Leadership Development there. I did that 6.5 years, worked for NSBA for a year, and then the most recent 7.5 years, I was Director of Board Development Services, basically for the Texas Association of School Boards. And so in my 16th year in this work of school board development, very vested in it, lots of ideas, lots of opinions, and lots of questions. And so I've learned some things already from questions that were asked of the secretary. Look forward to learn more.
Hi, I'm Allison Burlock. I'm on the school board in Winooski. I have a background in healthcare policy. So I work as the manager of quality and data analytics at Home Health and Hospice for the Health Network. So I have a background in process improvement and quality improvement, and also some policy. So I'm excited to learn about how this is going to work. I'm fairly new to the school board in Winooski, so and I'm now vice chair as well. So. Yeah.
Eric Montbryan, sit on the Wellsprings Unified Union School District Board, which is part of the Greater Rutland County Supervisory Union. Been on the board for 4 years, and I'm actually looking forward to getting involved in this work and seeing how it's going to affect our boards, as you know, in terms of governance. And I'm actually also excited to represent our small district.
Edie Branning from Mount Mansfield School District, Jericho, Underhill, Richmond, Bolton, and Huntington. I'm the board chair. I've been since COVID started, pretty much exactly. And I've been on the school board for about 10 years. So happy-ish to be here. Yeah. There's so many different ways that we govern school boards, and we've been on the policy governance path since 2015. We had our policies in place since 2016, just about. So I very much let the superintendent run the day-to-day. So I don't, I'm just putting it out there because it'll come out as I speak over and over and over again. So.
Michael Inners, I'm the chair of the Champlain Islands Unified Union District. On and off that, been on that board with predecessors for most of the last 15 years. I took a vacation for 2 years on the school board. My background is in chemistry, information technology, and I am an unrecovered attorney. For the area, mostly in the area of intellectual property, patents, trademarks. We don't have to wear a tie either. And 99% of our practices documents.
Thanks. And then for folks, we've got one person who wasn't able to be with us tonight. It's Gaston Bathwa. He is from Kingdom North, but he will be coming to hopefully to the remainder of the meetings.
Oh, and I'm Carrie Lamb I'm the Director of Operations at Vermont School Boards. I have also been on Barrytown School Board for a number of years, and happy to be here and taking your notes.
Thanks. So just by way of final introductions, I am not on the task force. I'm just here to make sure that all of you guys are happy and get going. And I asked Mark if he would take over chairing of the task force. So he will be your leader for the remainder of this effort. I want to thank him for doing that. You didn't have much of a choice. I asked him to do it.
I forgot to give you my background. If you wanted, but I taught overseas for 32 years in Okinawa and in Germany, and here in the United States, I've I was in very many school districts, including the Navajo Indian Reservation. And I have a doctorate in curriculum. Thank you.
What a great group we have here.
It is, yeah. You don't wanna tap some of these people maybe for VSBA board. or something.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Mark, it's all yours.
So I think we are on number 4 here, charge, scope, and process. So let's Phil, if he can kind of walk us through what it is we're supposed to do, since he speaks the language of governance far better than I do.
So the charge, we have that from the secretary, and he shared some information with us. I would draw your attention to the bullets at the end. I think he said some things that were very important and telling when he was talking with us. But you can see specifically what his expectation is to come from this task force. And the emphasis at the very beginning is on how does the board engage its community to establish a vision and goals, if you will. I'm just translating a little bit. The expectation is that boards evaluate the superintendent. And so that how's that done, and what is the connection to the superintendent's leadership, as well as incorporating achievement of student outcomes in that. And then there's a bit of a laundry list in bullet 3 that mostly says obey the law. But attention to transparency, ethical governance, adherence to open meeting requirements, avoiding conflict of interest, scheduling and warning of regular and special and emergency meetings, the maintenance and publication of accurate minutes, appropriate use of non-public sessions. We know what his expectation is. I think it's important that we mention right up front too, just process wise. So this task force will be proposing a set of standards to the VSBA board and Neil's board, just in case anybody takes issue with it. They will obviously have the privilege, the opportunity to make adjustments if they deem those necessary to what gets forwarded onto the secretary. So I just think that's important to note. You're developing a draft proposal, and personally, having been through some similar processes a couple of other times in other states, I have a lot of concern with how broad this goes. You will notice over time, and the secretary even alluded to this, the fact that they'll revisit this in 5 years. Once something gets proposed, becomes a document, it doesn't get smaller. So I've wondered over the last few months, as we could see this opportunity coming, how might the task force develop a very focused set of governance standards that's not the be all end all. It's not the kitchen sink and all the water and soap and things that go into it, but really focused on those things that school board members across Vermont believe actually makes a difference for students. I think of equity of experiences, opportunities, and outcomes. How might boards think about how are the students doing in improved experiences, opportunities, and outcomes? And but just, I think that's really important right up front to share that there's a legitimate concern. We should all sort of share that concern that this becomes something that grows into a Frankenstein sort of thing. So how can the task force again propose and develop something that's very focused and very, while it has that flexibility, it's got some clear guidance to it as well, so that it's informative.
So you want a skeleton?
I think so. I think that's right, Jackie, that, you know, as a curriculum person, the scaffold, if you will, right? And maybe not even a comprehensive scaffold. We also got intimated from the secretary that they're thinking already, what will quality assurance look like? And I think we could all be concerned with some of the words he used, investigation and review, that kind of thing. Perhaps we could also be thinking, by the time this short task force is completed its work, what are some suggestions we might make along with this for what quality assurance could and should look like. And the second thing that he suggested when he was talking about that was the idea of board self-assessment. So maybe that's a component, not simply an attestation, that was his first idea, but the second idea that the board is doing a meaningful self-assessment in a limited number of areas. And then there's the attestation, if I'm saying the word right, that we've complied. But it would behoove all of us to, begin with the end in mind. Knowing that this is something that becomes part of state rule. And we want to see and hope that it will encourage good governance, not simply be an opportunity to be used against school boards 5 years, 20 years from now. Even. We've got 3 other meetings scheduled. The intent was that we could receive input, and we're very open to hearing from task force members of the type of input that you might want to receive. I had an idea of a researcher speaking to the group. It'll be a Zoom meeting. And somebody who co-wrote the article that was included in your packet, Ivan Lawrenson from Montana, a 20-year school board member there. And they have some similar configurations in Montana to Vermont with elementary districts that feed into high school districts. But he's definitely a deep thinker in this work, and he's doing ongoing research, even though he's fully retired. He's doing ongoing research into promising practices around the country. Other options, obviously, when we get to that, you might want to hear from a state board member, or you might want to hear from a superintendent or some superintendents. We've envisioned at least one opportunity, maybe through survey, for all school board members in the state to be able to weigh in on a draft or to contribute. But we've also designed in our work over the next couple of months that this will be a main topic, or one of the main topics at regional meetings. And so our plan is those are virtual, that will break out into 4 different groups, and staff will be able to receive input from those that participate there as well. And then also we'll have an opportunity to discuss these at annual conference and the final meeting at the end of the conference to refine that final draft, if you will, based on input.
Okay. Questions before we?
So we're gonna be brainstorming, we're gonna be kind of organizing, same focus, we're gonna outline some stuff, and then I take it we can Bill, you will be and whoever else is guiding this will be actually doing the writing and providing us with written drafts, or is the expectation is task force members themselves to do a written draft?
So Carrie will have some minutes from this meeting. She's also recording so that things are captured. I'll be taking a few notes, and you'll expect a follow-up email from us within 10 days for sure, but as quickly as we can get sort of a summary, and that it may have an evolving draft to it. You'll notice in your packet too that this was part of our conversations with the secretary, just a very draft framework proposal.
And who's the author of that?
Me.
Okay.
And this was, my best thinking of the research and experience. It's just a starting place for conversation, that the standards would include identifying what are governance priorities. You might call that vision and goals. What are governance protocols? We often call that operating procedures in Vermont, but how the board does its work. And then governance processes. So those things such as policy review, and the organizing the board's work into a process that oversees the board, the superintendent, and the school system. For those that practice policy governance in the room, or you're familiar with it, I think you'll see a connection to some of that as well. So this was, again, just kind of, here's my first brush of what a framework might look like, and provide that opportunity, Bill.
Thank you.
And I'm able to take a shot at drafting things, who's smiling, because I can't stop drafting. Things go out, letters go out, and they come to me, and I our red line completely and it's rewritten everything. And they're like, oh, okay.
Are there only 3 attorneys in the room?
Is that enough for too many?
I wondered if anyone else would.
We're not
contest.
saying.
First of all, thank you. I have one immediate concern that was actually brought up through one of our board meetings. And I won't quote it exactly because it involved language that I generally don't use. But it came down to, how dare you? One more example of you trying to take local control away from us. I do not subscribe to that. I'm just passing it on. I have heard that in various communities throughout Vermont at different times. The second, when we look at outcomes, are the outcomes going to be tiered by the outcomes for the boards, which is then based upon the outcomes for the students or from the students? Or do we have a cutoff line that this is strictly for board governance and student outcomes are secondary?
Certainly a fair question for the group, right?
It depends on how we go. With the local control, first time I read the secretary's letter, I mean, paragraph 1 or 2 is talking about the importance of local control, and then he gets to the end saying, this is how the state's gonna tell you to do it. Like, it seems kind of odd, but playing around with it, and so much of what they're asking us to do, I think in some way or another has already been done. And bullet point number 3 is open meeting law. It exists. We're not going to recreate that. I think they just want to have the boards as aware as possible through some structure that not only do you know about the law, but this is the way you're going to approach it and make sure you're legal. A lot, at least if you're on a policy governance process, the VSBA's model policies already deal with a lot of stuff. It's just whether or not they're implemented and then actually followed. So at least for our board, this has been a struggle we've had since we consolidated 7 years ago. How we get reports and information back through the procedures of the policies. So we have our, wellness coordinator come in at least once a year and kind of give us the status of what's going on there, what reports have been filed, have to be filed with the state, how are we doing compared to last year, what are we planning on this year, which allows us then as a board to have some more information to, at 30,000 feet, hopefully make better decisions. And then with those reports, we'll tell them, maybe we don't need this, we thought we needed this information from you, but maybe we really don't, but I'd like to have it expanded over here to tell us more next year. And so for local control, and I think Flo is really is to become a monster. Maybe not a skeleton, but just very flexible guidelines that, depending on what your board makeup is and what your needs are, follow them, but we're not going to tell you this is how you have to do step 1, and then there's step 1A and 1B, and you need to do these things, and how it works for your board, as long as it's getting done somehow, and we can communicate back to the SBA or the secretary that this is, we kind of check these boxes, and we understand we're getting the information that a board should have to be a better board, which then tangentially leads to hopefully better student achievement, because we're making decisions that impact the students.
Right, and one of the other things that we need to do is what Secretary French said is look at that assessment and do what they call a backwards design. In other words, we begin with the end and then press forward. Because if you know the goal at the end, and that is making students better, or having a better framework to work on, or the fairness aspect, I come in with no backpack to school. My parents, one parent lives there and one parent lives there, and sometimes I go to grandma's. That kid comes in, and then there's the kid who comes in with their notebook and how do we put those two kids together and make them whole? they'll never be the same, but, you know, how do we make sure that they each get an equal opportunity? And so when we look at the needs of the students and the policies, we have to assure ourselves that the policies and the needs match.
Actually, well, I have something I wanted to say, but I'm glad you spoke out, because what I wanted to say was that we've heard from six men in the room. I've heard men and women, so I'd really like to hear from the rest of the women. And I'll wait to say what I'm going to say. Or the rest of the people on board, not just.
So we have kind of our scope, does that? Michael?
One thing you can keep in mind, the district I'm in, effectively all the boards in the supervisory union rejected policy governance. So you can keep that in mind, that not all boards are policy governance based. We should make sure that we don't do anything that either prohibits policy governance or forces people to basically adopt it in practice. Some of our, some boards in the whole region, it runs the whole gamut. Some boards that are very hands-off policy governance or approach to those that are really down in the weeds.
You're talking.
So there's some of the boards are really high level policy governance, others are really down in the weeds, micromanaging. Our board, I think, tries to float in between that somewhere. The board I'm actually on, but I think it's important that we really keep that in mind. There's a diversity of school board styles and they're legitimate within. I mean, there's some that are just off outside the range, but many of these are legitimate choices and what could be. Second thing is a little bit of difficulty, as our superintendent constantly reminds us. When you have a supervisory union with individual districts within, the individual districts do not evaluate the superintendent. That is the SU board's job, and there's it's kind of a ambiguity as to which hat you've got on at the moment if you're on both, but we should be, some of the language here sort of assumes that every district is going to evaluate the superintendent. In fact, that's not even allowed. So kind of opinion of the superintendent. And I think it's important that we keep equity in mind with the process. And finally, on open meetings laws and things like that, of course you have to comply with the law. We try and go further. Minimize the use of special meetings with short notices. We minimize the use of executive sessions. And really try and pay heed to the standard that it really should be used on premature knowledge would be different. And not just use it because it's authorized, but that's a concern I have sometimes it comes with this fall. I would consider trap, maybe you don't, but saying, well, it's a personnel matter, we go to executive session, right? It's not really sensitive information or premature knowledge. So there's more than just the statute or the clause itself. I think it could be said.
Well, and not to get into the weeds, but we've done that. Our district falls into that too. Part of the statute. Let's see if you're going to use executive session, not only do you say section 832 personnel, you then have to give your explanation as to why you think that needs to be. So there, we did it. I have one of our board members is an expert on Robert's rules in quote chapter and verse, and so he will hold us to the line, like, no, we can't do it this way. That. Okay. Other thoughts of where we're starting or where we're ending?
Well, let's look at where we're ending. What are we going to produce? Are we going to produce 12 statements? Are we going to produce 3 statements based upon the 3 things that you set up here? Or are we going to say, okay, boards, we're not telling you what to do. We're going to say, this is what you've been doing. Let's tweak it, rather than say, okay, we're saying, do this, do that, do this, do this. They'll say, okay, catch up to us in 5 years and we'll see if we did it. But I think you have to bring it in as to what we do well and what needs to be tweaked. Otherwise, you lose half the group.
I think they're gonna be implementing rules, regulations. It's gonna have to be more than words you've kind of been doing this, you should maybe do a little better. So I think they're gonna have some sort of structure that, you know, these are the 3 or 6 or 12 things that a food board that's focused on the outcome of students should be doing. Maybe how you do it can be up to you, depending on how your group works together or what structure your board is operating under. But here's some rules, here's some guidelines as to what you might be able to do, and then here's ways that you'll be able to figure out, did you do what you hoped you were doing?
Well, for instance, I was thinking, how many counselors does a school need based upon the population? You know, do we need 30 per school of 1,200? Do we need 10? You know, are we gonna set parameters like that? I don't think so, right?
I would,
And then I had another idea, and I posed this at our last meeting of the school year. Because we didn't meet in July, and we're getting really slow about meeting in August because it hasn't happened. But when we look at today's schools and all things and all the things that have happened around schools. And kids who are saying, you know, I'm not sure I want to go to school. It's really, really dangerous to go, especially in Texas. But can we redesign our schools and redesign how our boards work with schools and say, okay, maybe, and we've been saying this for years about high school kids who get up like this in the morning and go to their first couple of classes with their eyes closed, you know, and we've always said, hey, let's push the time up until, you know, but then the coaches come and the coaches say, no, we need those kids in the afternoon when they're all set to go. There has to be a little ground there. And hey, the one thing that has come out with all these shootings in school are that the children, the young people who are shooting people or their own schools or just visiting or whatever, they've never been a part of a club at school. They've never been associated with a group of kids. They're loners in school. And so you say to yourself, well, maybe if we made every student in schools belong to some type of curriculum, you know, after school activity, or in my case, I like to have them go in the middle of school, you know, have lunch and then a club meet or a team meet or a chorus meet or something meet that everybody has to go to. So you can't say knock off. These kids are home at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Their parents don't come home until 6. They're not doing homework for 4 hours. What are they doing? And so you say, well, if we kept them until 5 and had maybe a switch of kids or teachers, some teachers taught in the morning, some teachers taught in the afternoon type of things, we could switch it around. But, you know, that's just an idea that I had.
I don't know that that's necessarily
I think we're getting-
this.
Oh, no,
right?
it isn't
Yeah,
this.
so.
But the governance part of it is we can't, board members don't talk to, don't tell the superintendent what to do. We evaluate what they do, correct?
Sure.
Okay, so we have no way of evaluating us. Many people get into school boards and are elected into school boards because they say, oh, yeah, we're gonna push this music program and we're gonna push this, you know, football team in, or we're gonna push something in, and they don't get to do that. So they disappear. And
Yeah,
it's not part of our governance either.
no, I guess I'm going back to your begin with the end in mind. Like,
Yes.
I'm envisioning a checklist
That's good.
for this, that we could come up with some kind of a checklist that you could choose to attach. You know, we could decide, right, if documentation to support the checklist is required or not, or they could decide that or not. I feel like that might be a way to go, come up with some kind of a checklist for boards to complete. about, what are they doing? We have to decide what's on it. That's what I'm.
And will it be tied or correlated to current standard there? Current
Not for us
statute,
to decide.
well, not standard, the current statute. Again, we go back to the open meeting as a clear example. The statute says X. You will warn a meeting. It will be available to the public. It doesn't say all public members have the right to untimed presentation for as long as they want. Whatever we develop, as we look at how it fits within statute, will the boards be given some, I won't say guidance, just information that this is done and it fits with this part of a statute or this regulation?
Yeah, I mean, did all of your meetings, your board meetings and committee meetings meet the law, right, whatever the open meeting law,
Check.
check,
Yep.
you know,
Did
something
you
like
have
that.
any special meetings? How many did
Right.
you warn properly do that? And with the timing of the public, that's sort of up to the board to decide. First thing our board does, you're allowed 3 minutes, talk to the chair. And don't expect an answer because this is probably new information that hasn't been warned. So if we need to, we get back to you, unless your question is school open on Wednesday? No, it's not around.
So are you talking about like quality assurance standards in terms of like self-assessment?
That's what I'm envisioning. That's what it sounds like would be a good place to start. But that's just, as Jackie said, what's the end? Like that was what popped into my brain.
What are we going to measure?
That's what we have to figure out.
When you said quality assurance, the word I heard is enforcement.
Well, I'm saying, not sure, and I know the staffing of the AOE, they don't have the people that come out and enforce
Yeah.
anything. So if we would be able to put together some sort of checklist for self-assessment. I would believe that they would be happy, like, oh yeah, okay, we can see how that works, and in 5 years, if it's not working, we might have to tweak it, but to be able to have our own internal surveys, and again, I keep falling back on ours. Every year, all of the board members, we have questions about how we've done this year, and so we take a self-assessed survey and figure out, are we happy with the work we've done? Could we have done better in other things? We do the same thing with the superintendent. And how is she done and where are we going as part of our evaluation of her job?
And when I started thinking the place to start is with a self-certification. The secretary may feel differently, but I think I'd like to see us propose the self-certification.
Yeah, couple comments. I respect the secretary, he's a powerful person, he's big player here, and whatever we're gonna do, it's gonna go up and go through their sieve and everything else. On the other hand, our job is to do what's right, and we can put that sieve on once we've come up with something solid, but I don't think we should start with that. The other thing is that on Phil's outline, what a number of the task force is talking about is item B, governance protocols, and I'm not sure everybody is familiar with the term protocols, but it's basically a list of expectations that each board develops on how it's going to conduct its business. For instance, one simple one is like no surprises. One of our expectations is that a board member doesn't come and sets off a bomb before letting the chair know ahead of time, so there could be some preparation and ideally put it into the agenda, so we're prepared and we can use the time effectively. Another one is that we're going to have vigorous debate. Just giving you examples of vigorous debate, and at the end, once the board makes a decision, it's the board decision, and all of us have an obligation to support that decision, rather than, oh yeah, but, and you're down at the coffee shop or the general store saying how bad the board was. We don't have any individual powers. The board has the power. So anyway, what we're talking about is the power of setting those expectations. We don't have to have that tool. In other words, we don't have to spell those things out. Each board will do that, but it's a very powerful mechanism for the board to work efficiently. And then it goes to the question at the end of the year, how do we evaluate ourselves? we've already got our checklist. One thing is like, come into the board prepared meetings. How many people come in, they're reading the agenda? Well, how can they be prepared to talk about something if they haven't read the background information? So that's a tool to decide how we're doing here. Well, I'll have to admit, I'm busy and I haven't always done that. Well, I'll recommit myself to do it. So I think B is something that we should zero in on as a very useful, powerful tool for effective board governance. And appreciate that being down there. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I've written down 5 questions already for the checklist.
Nice.
Let's hear them.
Oh, okay. Establish a timeline or a time for public comments, did we? Did we establish a regular meeting time per month? And I guess along with that is no surprise meetings or limit ourselves to emergency meetings. Come prepared. Did we come prepared and did we maybe even because many people just sit at the board like this. So come prepared with 1 or 2 questions or 1 or 2 comments that you'd like to add. That's about it. I also put a note here to myself. I really don't know all the laws that govern school boards. So maybe we need to have a list of those for our next meeting too, so that we can align them.
It's kind of where I went first was to say what's already required of us before we start adding new rules, because
Well,
I
then
don't want to have to
we'll
be
appease,
on the wheel.
yeah, we'll appease what Mark said, why are they telling us what to do? Well, it's already written. We're just reminding you. Or
But because there are so many places it could be, it's like gather it all together into one place, which, I mean, that actually does happen. Student group do a good job, especially for new board member training. It's like, okay, you got elected for this. Do you really know what you got elected for? This is your job and this is not your job. So.
Yes, at our school boards, we have a policy meeting, separate. And each of the policies, I mean, some of them came like 3 and 4 pages, so we have a renewal. And I don't know if you guys have a renewal, but we say in 2 or 3 years, we're gonna put this on the calendar to review, because things happen. And so when we do that renewal, we take out a lot of this verbiage, and instead we look to Vermont school boards to put in the notes, they annotate it with the law, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
We did the same thing, ours was on a 3-year, so our policy review, once we finally got it all.
But that's another thing that we could put on our list.
David had a comment earlier, and I'm wondering if people want to break.
Okay. We've had other people, did you think you were holding?
Well, no, I'm listening and yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
It's just an observation. It seems like you folks your school boards are sort of normal places compared to ours, and we closed schools for COVID on a Friday. The superintendent announced we weren't going to open on Monday. Most schools open Monday and Tuesday. It turns out there were 8 kids affected in high school, so we didn't open Monday, Tuesday. On that Tuesday night, we hired a new superintendent. And a year later, after managing a pandemic, he resigned. And for almost 2 weeks before the 1st of July. So not a normal start. So then we had a principal who volunteered, very competent, and who volunteered to come in and take the next year of emergency. But just as that was getting underway, we had an article in the local paper about the history of sexual abuse that is well documented in the community. A few decades ago, but a lot of concern from the community about this sort of ongoing issues. So we've been involved with a professional investigator, 2 different attorneys, a consultant, a series of researchers who are coming in and doing research, and it's just the farthest thing from normal. And the things that you described, Bill, about sitting down, and yes, you described, Mark, about people, you can talk for 3 minutes and you make an answer, but God, I'd love to have just one meeting like that. It's just unbelievable. And not, people not dropping bombs. I mean, we've talked about all these protocols. We've got lots of support. And just last Monday, we finally were in a session with a facilitator who started to get at that. And there's some hope that we might have something like a meeting where we're not constantly, if we use the gavel, we hear it all night long. So anyway, just to share that perspective. But I heard a lot of really good things that make me really optimistic about this. The first one, I hope that it seems like we kind of have, and I hope we can leave the debate about local control and the debate about the positives and negatives of policy governance aside, because it's really not in here anywhere. And I think, Mark, what you said about A and B being done, I think that really is true. And the first, I think on the first one, A, on the draft that you'll put out, I think the governance priorities and how the board would inclusive processes incorporate community input. I think those are things that we could all write to Phil about. Here's how we do that. And that could fill in with some of the content is there. And then you already have ways for us. We already have ways to evaluate ourselves. So the advice would be, or the standard would be evaluate yourself. And with B, although Bill, I agree with what you said about the importance of this. I think all of this is in the essential work of school boards manual. I don't think that there's much here that we don't already have guidance on. I think just the question is, what would we write, what would we use to articulate the standard there? I don't think there's a lot of work for us to do on that. But on the third one, and which really, to me, my perspective, and after the last 2 years, it's become even more clear to me. I'm more committed to the importance of policies and implementing policies and having a really clear understanding with the superintendent, which I'm sure you'll recognize, is the superintendent and the board understand what's happening, and we've got really concrete ways of monitoring that and checking it regularly, and we're doing that work. And I think that gets to what Bill said right in the beginning about, or what the secretary said about quality assurance and about us not having it. That I think quality assurance, the outcomes are what we need to focus on. And Bill, you talked about focusing on what makes the most difference for students, and what are those things, and who are the outcomes, whose outcomes we talking about, outcomes for the school board or outcomes for the students? And I think we're talking about outcomes for students. Otherwise, well, I don't really know why we're here. So I guess what I'm saying is that I would like us to focus on outcomes and focus on the relationship between standards, our policies, and the outcomes, and how we make sure that we can get the good information that we need on the goals that are articulated in the policies. And not all of them, because our point is about that. But there are a bunch of basics. Well, student assessment, obviously, student performance, professional development, curriculum, evaluating teachers, evaluating administrators, action planning, public engagement is also here. Those are really, I think, they're the essential things. They're the outcomes that people would agree, and I think students would agree, make the most difference. So I think what I'm saying is I would like to see us focus on how can we create standards around getting, finding the outcomes that really matter. How can we make sure that boards get good information about that and are able to evaluate that and are able to whether is it an outcome of the quality assurance regulation that will meet it. So I think I'm not saying toss A and B out. I think there's lots that we can do to articulate that, but I think it really comes down to the processes that we use to get to our outcomes.
think it might be helpful before we do the next meeting, if we just get a brief review of the education quality standards that already exist. Even on LinkedIn, so we can, I can probably find them by, I can find them, but I actually haven't read
Yeah, they're under revision too.
them. So I mean, that would be. Because many outcome issues, or that's not really outcome, but very most of these things like how many counselors you have to have, how many librarians you have to have. Things like, although those things are all in that set of rules, among other things. But that would give us some idea to think of what the existing rules look like. I assume that, and the secretary is to integrate this work into that body.
Yes, we can
Maybe I'm
certainly
wrong,
send those.
correct me if I'm wrong.
No, we can send those to you. The Act One working group did a lot of work on revising those standards from an equity standpoint, and that work is underway at the state board right now. So it might be helpful for you to know about that as well.
So how do we? I agree with you. The VSBA manual that we were given. Hi, you're a new board member. Read that. Which is great. Imagine having that read to you, electronic synthesized voice page after page. I'm sorry, it's well workshop. Yeah, it's well done. It contains a great deal of what we're already talking about. How do we synthesize that into, I'm just throwing a wild thing right here, a 5-page document for school boards that includes the self-assessment. And then tie that to, go back to Secretary French's intonation. I don't want to say enforcement, but something that can be measured externally as well on a periodic basis. I have great faith in the majority of people and the majority of school boards. I've also had experience with guiding and governing groups doing their self-assessments, which consisted of 10 minutes of a meeting going, okay, yep, okay, good now, thanks, love y'all. Yep. At some point, we, the public, need to be able to go back and say, all right, you said you have done X things, you have provided equity of opportunity, you have provided equity of opportunity in co-curricular activities. Great. You say you did it. Just give me an example. What can I see? Where's the documentation? Oh, there it is. We're not great. The downside of that, of course, is this going to be a dead document? Meaning it's put out, it looks wonderful, everybody praises it, and now we're done. Or is it something the public can look back at and praise their school boards for saying, wait a minute, I have a question. Gee, Twinfield, you killed 4 of your extracurricular programs this past year. What was left? You know, that was overly dramatic, wasn't it?
So you're writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
That's
a lot
very
of lot of good thoughts.
Do we want to stretch for 5 minutes, or are we good to keep going for 45?
I drove 2 hours.
Yeah. Again, the restrooms are out that door to the right and then left. There's 2 on the left wall there.
And grab some food too, if you didn't already.
I could jump up the evening, running the straight right depends on the day. Really good conversations.
I can take it right here.
I don't know the person, Allison.
No, I'm gonna bother. You said a couple things, so I wasn't gonna pick on you right away.
Our school. So I've been on this for stuff like that. Slow moving in some understanding of what a link.
Absolutely.
Our schools are not accredited and they don't have automatic.
Excuse me.
I don't believe so.
Because when I was in high school that I went to, did the NYSC accreditation and I was gonna comment on my experience, because I was part of the self-study. And I was just going to comment on my experience with that, and also how it relates to my experience in healthcare and designation surveys and how, yeah, my thoughts on that. So I just wondered if school districts.
Well, I think Secretary French was talking about when he started in Canaan, there was something on the wall.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what kind of.
Three of them, but I still have all the light. So it's accredited without being officially accredited.
Without having a certificate.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in order to be a principal, you have to have the license to
Yeah.
be a principal. In order to be a superintendent, you have to have the accreditation.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, very nice.
Oh, I'm fine. Oh, did you go ahead with it? Did you receive? So you didn't volunteer for this, you were appointed?
Neil told me about the employer commissioner. We had five people leave and serve. That was being the alternate
Would love to
round.
read a draft. Could be a smaller. So, okay.
So you're talking about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I would love to be a part of that.
Are you coming next, it's four days a week to the, or you?
I'm on vacation next week.
Okay, so you got
My kids are coming down.
I'm on vacation too, so I'm gonna be planning wherever.
My kids and.
It's nice to put faces with names.
It is, it's so great to have.
Yeah.
meetings.
I know it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we just have next, the SBA board was meeting remotely for so long. And they had their retreat in June, but it was, at Bisbit, because they have a bigger conference room, so. They actually haven't been used to it in a while.
For kids.
Oh, she's out?
Across the river, the trail, every week.
So this is my card, and on the back of my cell phone is the wall. And if you write to me or text me, or then I'll give you a chance to come and or email. He doesn't seem to answer very well.
Love fresh fruit. It just seems like it just makes.
You sure you're welcome to get to the train? Sure, things like, we can't.
Alice, when is the next board meeting?
25th.
I think I didn't know that actually. Can you think of it?
Us too.
So, hopefully you didn't leave. That's cool. Board, kind of like that.
Well, we can also start.
What,
Just feels like that.
what keeps you coming back?
The kids.
We do, if your bottle, we have, returnables for a recycling bin out there.
That as guiding premise. I think if you get involved in it's the kids who suffer. Because without that. you have no- And we've all seen the chaos in schools.
Thank you. Do they need paper mileage reimbursement forms? And then
Thank you.
I had a note, but I didn't know.
And I didn't print them. Yeah, well, I'll do it right now.
Follow up email too, or?
But we're getting there.
It is a productive first meeting so far.
It's hard.
One story, man. So I think it's great.
Two.
I'm very lost.
I'm very impressed.
And one with the high school. And
I feel like even
now we
though
have
there's
some- that's what.
How many members?
None.
word differences, we're all on the same
So
page.
we are very unified.
What we're supposed to be doing, how we're gonna get there.
And
Figure it out.
working through that.
How it's your government.
How long has it been?
5 years. But we've been, so you were mandated to.
Is your board?
That's tough.
So it was not.
Voluntary, very.
Right.
Yeah, the ends and
Yeah.
executive limitations.
And then.
Not to that degree.
It's not like.
No, but we just modified ours
We
to
lost
step away from it.
Oh,
But
did
we
you?
still have the four, we still have the ends policy. we still have
Generally,
the,
good man, but
Management, the connection, and
immature superintendent.
whatever the board went.
And.
We kind of do all that, but we never went to the
So we're
very
we're
structured.
getting through that.
Yeah, no, we have a big reboot that we just did with all of our new board members over COVID, and Monday is our first meeting. It's gonna be fun. But it's good, we have a really good group.
Yeah, what?
We have a 15-member board, way too big. And
Before.
we have, I think, a third of the board that were on it when the original put everything together, 2/3 are brand new. And they're like, why are we doing this like this? You know,
We are one
because
board
COVID,
that's
you know, you didn't get a whole lot of reports during COVID.
All
because
three
the superintendent-
So you don't have to in district. You have, you're basically the SU board for.
We got the same percentage, we're only 12 members, but
Yes,
there's
that's
only
right.
4 of us. The original
Yeah.
elevation, there's still there.
It's a very unified union district.
And luckily it hasn't been all at once, but
Yeah.
1 or 2 at a time, so they kind of get up to speed.
And you're responsible.
I'm the only person still.
Just within.
I'm not sure that the president of the union is happy about.
Very, very town. The two.
I hope it turns out that that are, make up your.
Right, and then they don't have any say in governance, but we do accept students from the town.
Now.
Yeah, with everyone. Remote, it's easy to get,
And, so.
Are you a singer?
We have been.
Mark Kaufman, are you a singer?
Yes, why?
That rich baritone bass voice I'm hearing, I didn't want to assume I made that mistake.
I have bachelor's and master's in vocal performance.
Wow.
Yeah. Made my living once I got out of the Marine Corps for about 6 months with a touring company, 4 fans ago,
Well,
and I write jazz.
oh, no, we probably need to talk about that at some point. Maybe we'll need a 5th.
Or if we need a fundraiser.
Yeah.
Right.
If we need a fundraiser, we can.
I actually have a house band. I don't, there's a group of us that get together, and that's what we do, is fundraising. We do benefit concerts for nonprofit groups.
We needed something at conference. Seriously.
Tell me what you need. We'll design.
All right, so let's drop down to maybe 4C1. try to figure out our own little structure and organization. That way, and then move on. We're meeting on the 1st and the 15th remotely.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and scribe up here so everybody gets that
I can fill it out. for you if you want.
September 1st. Not with that.
Not else. So it's gonna be, it'll be Zoom 5 to 7 again, or for those meetings?
I think so. Bill, were you planning on 5 to 7?
It's really, the preference of the group. I mean, if that's the right time, great.
Can't see that, Phil.
Can't see it.
You need another one. Try green.
I had green, it was
I'll
horrible.
bring this one down. Maybe they're all.
Right here.
This one's the green one with the red top. It doesn't matter. Here's blue. All right. So just the idea of describing what you might
Yep.
want to accomplish in those meetings.
Well, I'm assuming that we try and put some of the thoughts that we have down into a single document, different ideas, different structures that have been hanging about, and then try and expand on or say that's not direction we want to go, or that's kind of out of our league. And start to narrow things down and tighten them up for the 3rd meeting.
Can you put a before September 1st? Is that September 1st?
You can't see
Yeah,
it.
so
A before September 1st would be, what are the quality standards that already exist? A little paper, and so that we can work from there for our questionnaire.
I think Michael asked Sue if she can maybe send out links. I'll get that out tomorrow, or Monday.
Oh, that'd be great.
I had down a list of legal requirements for school boards and overview of education quality standards for follow-up.
We'll have that in our inboxes in the near future to do a little bit of homework.
A list of questions for the questionnaire?
Yeah.
A list of questions for the questionnaire?
is that
The
for
checklist that Edie was
Checklist?
talking about, or
Yeah. Checklist,
things that you might want to do.
like a board self-assessment? Is that-
correct.
And I'd be happy to share with how we do. We have actually a work calendar that we set out for the year, and these are the reports that are going to be at each of the meetings. This is what we're planning on doing. This is, the report will link back to a specific policy or procedure. The policy just says this is what we want to do, and the procedure then tells us this is how we're going to do it, and this is the metric that we're going to be using to evaluate whether or not the policy is being used. So we try and set out an entire calendar for the year of what it is we're expecting. So, in a way, the checklist says, did we do that? And that's where the superintendent, she's on that, is like, okay, this is, we have been following what we're doing. We had to skip this one because the first was 6, so we kind of swapped it out, but we still got the information. I don't know if the 1 or 2 experts that you were just thinking would be helpful, would they be good for the 1st or more for the 15th, as we have more specifics, or would you rather have expert thoughts as we're trying to still deal with general before you get to specifics?
And I would think they would be better to inform on the front end, the 1st, and then task force can say, whichever way.
Hey, either way, I think would be helpful if we have it on the 1st, they might be able to give us information we can then build on. If we did on the 15th, to just hand them the document that we created to say, this makes sense, it's pretty good. Or maybe both, if we had different experts who do the same thing. I'm not sure, do you know them where you think it's better, by time, third time?
Yeah, and I was thinking the input on the front end, but then again, the task force can consider or not, but probably not too difficult to get some outside experts to give review of the draft. And whether the task force wanted the same people or other people that have done some governance research and work.
It might also be helpful if we could get it to Secretary French on either before the 1st or 15th and say, is this anything that you think is what you were hoping to see before we give you something in October where you're like, well, I have no idea what this is. Good question. Pursue or deal with
Do you think Secretary French wants us to provide him something in a sort of the same style as other education? Quality standards, sort of ready to be pasted into the regulatory process, or is he looking more for an outline? Or is that something we haven't thought about?
Yeah, well, I don't, I mean, I could certainly ask him that. I think that he would appreciate having probably a little bit more than an outline. And then, you know, there's always a chance that he's going to change it, but I think it would be helpful for him to have more than an outline.
I had in my mind's eye that we're gonna give him something that he, if he liked it, could just be dropped straight into the legislative record. I know that it's always nice to have the final as opposed to something, oh, here's my notes.
Mhm.
So something written more in the style of a regulation and, with suggestions.
That's what I was imagining, but I could be off base. I haven't talked to him about it. It just seems like, I think based on how much they are all doing or are all treading water as best they can, the more that we can do, the less it's on his shoulders. And it means that more than likely what we're hoping will go in there will stay in there.
Right, well. I
You
was
just give
like-
notes, and he may switch things out the way he wants it, but if he has a final draft, and he's like, yeah, that looks good. Then what we're really hoping to have happen is a likelier possibility.
Just put section, he just put section numbers on it and send
I
it. Yeah.
wanna, go back a little bit on that. We've never met before. This is our first meeting. We have all different perspectives and experience and passions and expertise. And the things that turn us on and off. And within 3 more meetings, we're gonna come up with something to give to the Secretary of Education of this fine state. So I wouldn't get bogged down on whether it's ready for publication or not. I think we have to spend, what's the important things? And we start with an outline. And if we could quickly get there, then we can start filling in that outline. But if we want to get bogged down with the exact language, because we haven't come up with the product yet. Jackie's talked about, what are the key end results that we're aiming for? As good governance, and then we'll start defining that as we spend more time in that. But I think that's got to be the thing. What's the key thing that boards need to do to be effective boards? What are they? And it can be an outline to start. But it's very important for us to come together on that outline. It could be 6 points, but we can spend the whole night on whether that's important or that's too much detail. So I just encourage us to try to focus on what's the important things. I think Jackie said very well. What's the end product that we're all, why we're in this business and high paid at that. And to have it organized. And I think Bill and Stu can help it, keep us that organized in a way that the secretary can dig into it. And we've got a good start tonight, and part of it is just sharing ideas. And we need to do that and getting acquainted.
He did outline the 3 things, and you could take 3 words from that. The first one was community engagement. It's not one word, but the next one was superintendent evaluation.
Yeah.
And the last one was meetings, how the meetings are conducted. And so it's almost like, you could use those three concepts that he asked for, although he put a lot of words into it. And then outline it from there, and then write your paragraphs. And I'm sure somebody in this group can write paragraphs. I'm more of an outline person myself, but I think that's the nitty gritty. That's the final, I think. That's what we're aiming at, but how we get that into a skeleton view and put it out.
I think Bill's got a good point that really just gonna be dependent on how well we get this done by October. What we have in October is a series of notes and thoughts, and that's as best as we can get. We'll turn over. That's what no one's gonna fire us. If by the 15th we've got a solid thing, then we can start looking at, well, how would this actually be worded by a representative or senator. I think we have two different end goals. We have the end goal of what should a school board in general be striving to do so that the students that they are working with have the best chance possible. We also have the end goal of what it is that we're going to do at the annual meeting. What are we handing over for the VSBA to consider? So one's strictly what we are doing as this group, and the other one is broader picture. What is it that we're hoping these regulations are going to allow boards to better do their jobs?
We haven't heard from a couple of people.
No, and then that was, but I just want to make sure. So we'll do 2 Zooms. Is 5 to 7 work for people? Is there a different time that's?
It depends upon it depends upon the day of the week. I mean, I have board meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I checked my calendar and I was hoping that.
I'm not available on the first, but I can watch a recording, especially if it's experts talking to us. I can do it later, but I can't do it.
What time would work?
Probably like 6:30 or something like that, which is getting pretty late.
Well, if it's at home, 7 is perfect for me. I don't watch TV.
And would a 6:30, 8:30 be problematic for anybody?
Can you get 8:30? I have a regular Thursday meeting, but I'm on the rescue squad. So yeah, I could just skip that.
So we want to do 6:30 to 8:30 on the first and like 5 to 7 on the 15th, or we just want to stay 6:30, 8:30, so we're not confusing ourselves.
Yeah.
Need that 5 to 7 works for you on 15th. Okay, well, we do that then 5 to 7 on the 15th, and then I'll be back in person at the end of October. I didn't know what date that is.
21st.
21st.
So we'll be at the conference.
So, yeah, I think we will meet as a group at the conference and then present. I think it's 15 minutes or something or whatever it is. How is the board itself and then
The board is going to consider your recommendation at its November board meeting, which is the second Wednesday in November.
so will this, I don't know, is this group in some way gonna present anything during the annual meeting, or we're just gonna meet and then hand off the final product to you to put into their packet for the November?
Can you speak to that a little bit, Tim, about what we thought about in
Yeah.
the conference?
Yeah, so we want to have a session at conference that talks about governance standards. And it would be great to have task force members, those that could participate in that and maybe help foster that conversation with board members from around the state. Again, to kind of maybe get their nuance or opinions. And then there's always that possibility, I don't know if I want to say this out loud. There could be another meeting between conference and the VSBA board meeting, if the task force feels like it still has more work to do.
But we are planning an actual meeting of this group at the conference. It would be on Friday afternoon after the workshop sessions are over, so you wouldn't have to miss other things.
Roughly 2:15, 2:30.
Yes,
And then there's also the regional meetings where this will be discussed in bigger, broader terms, and any of you that have to be within your own region, you can be online just to chime in and say, yep, we're doing this.
Yeah, so half of the regional meetings will be done between September 1st and September 15th, and then the other half are going to be done between that conference. So, but we'll just keep compiling that input.
So we'll have some at least outside thoughts on big picture things. All of our colleagues are kind of thinking, yeah, this is a good thing, or what are you talking about?
And maybe, it'd be great if this task force could give some input or guidance into that. My thought is we're asking board members for what they feel like it's most important for a school board to do. And so we're getting, that variety and variance of practice from across the state.
And then you're thinking doing that as a formal sending out some sort of survey or questionnaire to all board members across the state, or?
We talked about doing it as a survey as well, and I think that's a good idea, so that we can ensure everyone had ample opportunity to do.
I just wasn't sure about number 3 with survey, whether we're thinking all of us are gonna go to our board meetings and say, hey, what do y'all think? Or is it gonna be something coming from this office saying, what do you think?
We're thinking statewide survey to everyone.
What's the target on that? Time.
Before conference for sure, and I'm thinking definitely after September 15th. But somewhere between September 15th and having it end before October 15th.
Anything is possible to do before September 15th? That gives us one meeting to try and see if there's anything coming from outside.
That means we're writing it at the next meeting.
Well, that's, so you're thinking we're gonna write the questions for the survey, or you had something in mind that you wanted to just kind of generally?
I think for the survey would be some working draft elements from this task
Okay.
force. Would be most beneficial to get.
All right, then it makes sense to do that. I was just thinking you were gonna ask a couple of, like, basically Dan French's letter in question form, like, what do you think about? In which case, we're just getting general stuff, but if we're gonna send out thoughts that we're gonna see if people like the ideas, then that would make a whole
Yeah,
different thing.
I think feedback on the task force draft.
Okay. So I think we kind of jumped around with number 5 and 6 during our discussion of early 4. So for next meeting online, try and get some stuff into a single document that would go out a few days at least beforehand, so we have something to work off of based on what we're gonna see from the recording, and then any notes. And I can share some of the things that my board does. If any of you have things that your board specifically does that you think are relevant, you need to send them to me or to Sue, and we can compile those. We have different examples of how boards are doing some of these things already, or where you think maybe your board is falling down.
Do we have emails to all of us, or, you send us a list of their names and,
Yeah,
What
we can
you
send you
is that possible?
we can send you a list of the names and numbers.
So I'm. sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm still seeing an opportunity here to point out the state laws that make, I don't know, being on a school board that maybe are out of date, like the warning, to warn a meeting, you're required to put it in the newspaper today. We don't have a newspaper in our town. We could put it in the Burlington Free Press, and that's not, so it's irrelevant. But there are other things that would make more sense on warning. So I feel like we still have that opportunity throughout this to point out the laws that are ineffective or working against perhaps. Or making us out of compliance, because to put something in the Burlington Free Press is costs a lot of money, is not as impactful to our district. And just those things like that.
Our paper gets it wrong.
But, yeah, and I mean, with online opportunities that, they just
I think that could be a side memo,
totally,
to say, in general,
But
open meeting law has some problems.
And if we can be as specific as possible, I think that's the only way that there's gonna be any modification.
Yeah, and I think that would be helpful, but I don't think it's within the realm of individual governance.
Right.
Yeah, if we find things to go along, which I have done on occasion, and I assume the attorneys here is like, this model policy doesn't actually, we've got 15 minutes. We want to kind of brainstorm other thoughts or. Mark, sorry.
So one of the things that I thought I heard just from the discussion going around the table was, so we've got the draft sort of proposal that everybody had, and these were, you know, came directly right from the Secretary of French's letter, right? And I thought I heard pretty much universal support that these seemed appropriate, right? Accurate. And I wonder if what might be a benefit is going into the next meeting. I wonder if there are things here that your local boards or boards that you know do that in your mind represent good governance that aren't captured under one of these items here, right? The idea that this is the start, maybe there's some stuff that could be added based on your own experiences with your boards or other boards, to flesh this out a little bit more, make sure that we've sort of got the big picture, and then maybe use this then as the basis to start to refine and flesh out the details on some of these things, to the level that sort of gets to what, you know, like a rule might look like, right? So what I also thought I was hearing was maybe presenting something to the secretary that's near sort of finished format. I think we're in a unique position. Oh, I agree, Bill, that you've got a disparity of, I think, different understandings or different approaches to things right here. But the one thing we all have in common is we're school board members in Vermont, right? We've been given this, I think, what I call a golden opportunity to set the rules for ourselves rather than have somebody else set them for us. And so I do think that a certain level of detail might be to our benefit. So that when that draft is presented, it might have a chance of making it through the rulemaking process with, you know, maybe minimal change, and that it actually represents what we thought might be good for us, right? So just a thought as we're considering maybe what, you know, what types of things you want to address in the next meeting to try to get us moving forward and to that next level of detail.
Everyone's coming out of Eric, Allison, you guys wanna
No,
write in or?
I've listened to everyone and I agree with a lot of it. I would say that, I think the framework is a good start. I'm concerned, like from my experience, what I've noticed is that, coming from a small community with small boards, is that not everyone's doing a lot of this stuff. And so that might come, you know, to go and say, this is what is expected might come as I guess, a shocker, just, I think that having the, you know, like, Neil said, detail on, you know, how to, do some of this would be beneficial. That's kind of, you know, one of my concerns in that. And I would say that, I don't necessarily agree with stuff that's like already in statute, necessarily like reiterating it. And that's just my opinion. I just think it would be, you know, things like, you know, like the open meeting law, that should be some of the first things that, you know, boards are acknowledging and taking care of and abiding by. But a lot of A and B, I totally think is a good start. And you know, how we refine that are good next steps.
So my thoughts are that we have to think about this, the students, the people that we're actually working for, right? And that a school board can have beautiful minutes, but if their students are not achieving the way that the vision, mission statement is set up to have them achieve, then the minutes don't really matter, right? So it's all about the students and how they're gonna do. The other thing, and I work in healthcare, so hold on for a second, but people, organizations in healthcare have professionals who spend their entire jobs 40 hours a week, making sure that you're conforming to the regulations, the standards. And we don't want to go that way, I don't think, with education. I don't think that that exists now, where you have, each school has a regulatory consultant or coordinator to make sure that you're following the, inch thick, regulations that really can get as specific as your meeting minutes have to be, like this or like that. So I think we need to be very careful about what we put together so that we're not heading down that path. And I've had two experiences with this. One is actually as a student, a couple, 25 years ago, the high school that I went to went through the NEASC accreditation process. And I was on the self-study committee, and I just remember thinking, like, we are spending so much time getting paperwork together. And I think there has to be a balance between the massive hours we spend getting that accreditation, getting all the paperwork together to have that shiny certificate versus doing what students actually need, getting the services that students need and working directly with the students. So there's that. And then there's also, we just did a survey at my home health agency that was about 10 months of preparation and then 3 days of surveyors from the state coming in to look through all of our paperwork and stuff. And I just think those are just extreme things that we want to avoid if we can. So those are my thoughts.
Well, and to Mark's point, once you do have all that paperwork, because it's inevitable that there's gonna be some of it, it's been filed away and no one uses it, or is it now useful for the community to understand what's going on? Is it useful for the board to say, oh, we're not getting the metrics we hoped to, or the metrics we said we wanted to see really don't tell us anything. We should be looking at this other thing, and so we can learn from these reports and evolve them over time.
And is there any, like, I know we don't like, some people have used this word in the negative way, but is there any enforcement that comes along with that document? Or is it just a document that you can choose or choose not to look at? Which, like, what are we building here? Which one is it? I guess.
It might now be part of our single document, exactly how far down the rabbit hole we want board members to have to follow. Are they having to read that much before the next meeting, which none of them will, or they won't understand it, or the other side is, we go in there and say, so, how are your kids doing? That's great, all right, meet you next week. Somewhere in the middle, it's gonna be a nice.
Well, for me, I understand, like CMS, right?
Yeah.
Comes in and reviews your processes, but I mean, we're talking about medications, we're talking about, those types of things. On the school board, we're talking about, can we educate everybody? Do we have enough money to do this? Do we have to put out a bond? Those are the things that, do we need a new building? Those are the things that boards get involved with. I don't think they're with NEA too much anymore, but that process is only like every 10 years.
Okay.
So it's not every year.
Yeah.
It's just for someone to come in and say, hey, you're doing a great job, but you might look at this. They used to just count library books in my day and say, yeah, your library is really good. Now today, I don't think they'll be counting library books, but they'll be counting how many, stations you have for computers, how many. So yeah, it rolls on, but it's not CMS. CMS is quality control from the government, right? And we're not CMS. But we do need to look very, very carefully, I think, at budgets, and I don't think we do a good job at that. And for me, I mean, I have to sign off on all those expenditures each month, and our SU moved from one place to another place, and so I got the bills and all the checks and things, and I wrote back to the person who put it together, the budget person, and I said, "Who's Charlie?" Charlie had $5,000, and it just said Charlie. Oh, Charlie's office. I said, I don't want to be Charlie, $5,000 office. So I wrote back to the person. I said, I can't approve this because I don't know who Charlie is, and nobody does that. I mean, 2 other people signed that document and didn't call her. So, yeah, I think, oh, by the way, Charlie, it was the name of the company who supplied all the furniture. So it wasn't just one office. Yeah, but, yeah, nobody questions some of the things that we put down, and it needs to be questioned.
Mark, who else would the task force like to have input on?
First, before you, yeah, that's follow first.
Sorry, so I have two things. One of them is Secretary French, I thought mentioned this as one of 4 or 5 pillars that would be monitored. So this is just the governance standards, their education standards, right? There would be something with budgets. I didn't write down, I was listening and reading because reading is really important at the moment. So I feel like this, we have a smaller task than, you know, and obviously all of the rest of it is very important, but that's, I think, why that isn't included in here. At the same time, student voice as part of the governance process could be something to include in here. I know that's something that's really important to our board and our board's process. So that was a piece that was missing. So I just wanted to make sure that gets added in here. And then I worry when I see, I'll get to the whole thing. I think community input and community engagement, that's a huge, it's really something I think is very important. And when we talk about it to the vision and goals, I want to make sure that it's not an annual thing, like that the next sentence says annually. I think if you change your vision annually, you don't have a vision. And so I think that we have to be really clear that when we're just not to conflate those two things.
You know, forever, that the thing is that we just have to revisit it if we say, well, are we still happy with this vision? Is this where we're?
And I look at it as like a 5 to 10 year kind of thing, so that, you know, our district isn't doing this.
Yes.
The vision is the big, but then you're talking about goals, or the goals are very powerful. What you want to do within what period of time is measurable and important, and or meaningful. So, I'll toss some of those ideas when we exchange emails, that sort of thing. I would love to, I'd like to suggest that we ask Phil Gore, who happens to be with us tonight, to share his findings and expertise. You heard his experience, phenomenal experience all across the United States. He's also a person who's who's part of an editor of a book on school board effectiveness. I see it right here. And it's a great read. And there's several others I see that Phil has as well. So he's not going to be beating his drum, but I like to beat his drum, and I'd like to suggest that Phil give us a briefing in an upcoming meeting. The most important things that you think make a difference in effective board governance. I think it'd be very fruitful if we did that.
Well, to the question you were going to ask, who we want to hear from, you are the expert who knows the experts. So if there are 1 or 2 people you think we absolutely need to hear first, I would your background to say, yep, that's, I know the names, but I'm not sure who's going to be the best for what we need. But I have a feeling you do.
Yeah, you know, Ivan Lawrenson that co-wrote the article that was passed out and distributed in the link. He's worked closely with me for the last 9 years, and he built his research for his dissertation on the Iowa Lighthouse Study, which is chapter 1 in that book Bill's referring to. And if you do a Google search or Google Scholar search for school governance and studies, the Iowa Lighthouse Study will, you know, probably populate at the top, and is the most cited study there is on school governance right now. I wish I could claim that my studies were, but they're not. And chapter 1 in that book is worth the cost of the book. It's very well done. It's almost the opus of the author, as she passed away not long after writing that chapter for us. That book has 22 authors, and our intent was a compilation of the latest research on school governance that was available at that time. I was mentioning to Mark Koenig at the start that we had hoped that boards would pick that up and use it as a book study. But where it's most often used is in education doctorate programs and superintendent preparation programs. But Ivan Lawrenson and Bill McCall wrote chapter 4 in there, which built upon the Iowa study. The Iowa study clearly showed a relationship between what boards do and student achievement. And then Ivan and Bill's studies that have gone on now for the last several years build upon that to show specific actions of school boards that can make a difference. And something very exciting that he told me about just a few days ago, I think I talked to him Sunday. They're finding in their research that governance needs to be differentiated, which was just kind of mind-blowing to me, but shouldn't be, right? That depending on the demographics of your community, good governance might look different based on your student population and your community's demographics. So I know that he'll be eager to share some of that with us. The other book I carry around with me everywhere I go is called The Governance Core. And this book was written by internationally renowned educational leadership professor Michael Fullan and the former executive director of the California Association of School Boards. And it's a very accessible book. It's written in layperson's terms with a lot of good metaphors. And it's not as research heavy, but it's certainly research informed. And for those of you that, could get that book and read it, The Governance Core, again, it has a lot of good metaphors that help explain governance, but also some insightful thinking about what are we really trying to accomplish with governance. And I can check and see if Davis Campbell is available to speak to the task force on one of those days. And he would be, a very thoughtful, heartfelt contributor. He's thought deeply. He's a professor emeritus at one of the large California universities and would, have some gravitas to what he contributed. What I drafted for the task force to consider, and you've talked about tonight, this idea of priorities, protocols, processes. These are things that I'm continuing to think about, to unpack, to develop, to wonder what are the right words for Vermont, how do they fit? But we need to be clear in what our priorities are, and whatever you call that. I'm sorry, I got to talking. And I'm mindful of the time, but research has shown that the board has to have a plan. And I think you'll hear that from Dr. Lawrenson in particular. Doesn't matter what you call the plan, it can be the shiny rainbow plan, but you have to have a plan. Where do we want to go? What's our vision for our students and how will we get there? I think it was David that really underscored the importance of board protocols. Bill did. We heard that echoed, and we know that that's really important. What are our norms of behavior? How do we do our work together? And then this catch-all of board processes. My doctoral work was on superintendent evaluation because as a board member, that was something we did not do well. And I've been painfully aware as I travel across the state of Vermont that a lot of systems are struggling. If they even do an evaluation of the superintendent, they're really struggling with what is that process like. So I think that touches on what I think of as big buckets, opportunities for improvement. If we could have clear priorities and evaluate our superintendent based on those priorities with input from the superintendent about what progress looks like. It's not a heavy-handed top-down. It needs to be a very collaborative relationship between the board and superintendent. This is what we've agreed to, and this is what we're evaluating. Bill pushed the button, I'm sorry. I'm gonna try to be quiet. I was really curious if people had interest in hearing from any of the state board members. Is that value add? Or any of legislators or other people in Vermont that you might know of? That should we hear from superintendents? Should we have one or more superintendents speak at an upcoming meeting or an input mechanism from them? Is that Is that valuable to this work?
Well, I think we'll have a number of superintendents on site from the end of October, so if we feel like that's something we might want to do, then they'll. Bunch of them will be at the annual meeting anyways. And we can like share on that. We're gonna have one or two of your experts on the first to the 15th, plus our 2 hour time, plus often, I don't know how many guest speakers you want, because then we have nothing to say to each other.
And I would just agree, and if we're gonna look at these 3 categories and lining it up, I can't imagine that any superintendent would not be okay with that.
I don't think they'll stay to the end of that, those 2 days.
You think they'll be gone by the time we meet, yeah,
I almost think that you need to meet with them at lunch.
at annual conference.
I think we can figure out in one of the next 2 meetings, is that gonna be something that if it is, then we can have you try and wrangle.
And I think we also have to be cautious that individuals who come onto school boards come from all different stripes. And if we're up here in this ethereal research, I'd like to, try to sell that to the guys in Williamstown.
Right.
You know, so I think we have to be cautious and cognizant of that. And also with the fact that if this is going to evolve into the rulemaking process and eventually into legislation, you have to be very clear and concise and foundational, because as individuals come onto boards, they want to know what it is they're supposed to be doing, because most people who come into onto school boards don't come fully apprised of what it is that the school board does. So we have to be aware of that. And then the last piece is the longevity piece. There are a lot of things going on right now. We're coming out of a pandemic. There certainly are budgetary concerns. There are demographic concerns. There are population concerns. So we have to be aware that we're just not writing for the immediate present, that these are going to be memorialized in statute for a long time. So that's what I would warn, that rather than, getting involved with mystic and all that kind of stuff, stick with the reality. And if you're going to be an evaluation tool, you have to give people the foundational skills for what's going to be being evaluated. You cannot hold someone accountable for things they don't know. So if you haven't told them, and then we're going to evaluate them, they're not going to do it right.
Right, one of our superintendents, he writes out his goals for the year and he puts it in the book. And every time he does something, he puts that in the book. And I said to him the last time we evaluated him, I said, would it be helpful to do a mid-year evaluation? Saying, oh, well, or instead of at the end saying, oh, I didn't do this and I didn't do that. And so a mid-year evaluation in January might be helpful. But, that could be optional. If the superintendent makes their goals, that's what they should be evaluated on.
Just had our superintendent meeting or evaluation meeting a couple weeks ago. We're starting and finishing the last one and starting the next one. And that's much what we've been talking about the last 3 or 4 years as to how to better evaluate our superintendent.
I mean, we do that. I mean, principals do that in schools. Especially your first and second year teachers, they evaluate them mid-year. Sometimes some of them evaluate them every quarter, but a mid-year evaluation tells you, okay, you've accomplished this much, now what else?
That's they haven't utilized Vermont School Board Association staff, got an excellent consulting team to help on on superintendent's evaluation. And so you're not reinventing the wheel. And secondly, I think it covers, management, leadership, the whole culture, the whole series of things. And then it ends with setting superintendent goals for the next year. And that really got our whole team really involved with the superintendent, and we worked out those goals. Those goals are not only superintendent goals, that's the school board's goals. And so that exercise is not only important for the superintendent to say, this is important, I buy into it, and this is what I'm gonna try to achieve. For the school board saying, these are our goals too, and we're gonna work together. And that tool, that power, I think is gonna go a long ways in our supervisory union, helping the superintendent and the board get what we want to achieve and then measure our joint results at the end of the year. And thanks to Sue and Phil, we've got the team here to help us do that. So if you haven't afforded that, you might do that.
I have two questions before we leave. Somebody mentioned vision, and I know there's a vision statement, but the strategic plan is even more important, I think. And I'd like to see, school systems align their budget to their strategic plan, which they don't do. And the other thing I'd like to mention is in Vermont, we're very unique because we're trying to establish equity, but we're rural, which means that some kids will never get what other kids have. And the more we can work on rural, and I know in southern Vermont, I don't know if this has come to Brattleboro yet, but we're working on a IBM system, which will bring fiber optics to all the rural areas, and they got a grant for that, but that's one of the things that we desperately need.
I'm just chuckling because I think we should feel sorry for all those city kids. And the things they don't have.
We wouldn't believe it, but city kids don't have it either.
I know. The rural, everyone thinks that the rural kids have great difficulties, and you just look at their strength and how they're doing and what's going on in some of the rural communities, and it's not that.
Well, they have a hard time joining clubs after school because nobody's there to give them a ride if the bus doesn't, their activity bus doesn't go that far. And so that's hard. And I know it happens down in North Carolina. I talked to a friend of mine and she works with displaced kids, and she said they could never join the group because the bus drops them off, but the activity bus doesn't. And so they don't have parents to bring them back to school.
But that ties back into strategic plan and budget.
Yeah.
Budget transportation is a big line item.
Or rearranging the school day.
Others, a few minutes over, but we've been doing okay. All right, so I guess we'll try and get some things. We're gonna send out some links in a day or two, and then we'll try and get some one-pagers to think about, and then I will see all of you on Zoom, 6:30 on Thursday.
Yeah, it's mileage reimbursement forms. Everybody should have one.
You don't have to figure out what your miles are. I can figure that out.
Great.
Your address is fine.
You want us to give them to you?
Yes, please.
Only if you want to be paid.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
I know.
Thank you. Oh, great. If you put it on here, I'll use the one you.
Yep. I got a dream of figuring it out for you, but I know what it is. I mean.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I talked too much.
Not at all. Not the cord.